So
All right. Hey guys, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear
yeah,
you.
Beautiful.
Imagine
Thanks for
that.
having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
For sure, for sure.
We were so very not prepared, honestly.
I had like a medical thing a couple months ago, and
His
I hate
brain's
to
not
say my
functioning.
brain is still not all back into it. It was just by herself for about like a month or so,
Right.
and I am just still not 100%. But
You'll get there. You'll get there.
I'll take blame for us not being prepared.
Yep, it's all Chris's fault. All Chris's fault. Yep. Did you send the snow my way?
What, me?
Yeah, you.
No. Is it snowing?
Yeah, we had some snow today, yeah. In
Ah,
Wisconsin.
I would kill for some snow right now
Why?
because my day job is dependent upon it.
Oh, I
That's
guess that's a good reason. Then he
how
should
I
li
make money,
you should make money in Syracuse then.
I
right?
could make billions every year.
Mm.
Billions, I don't know about that.
We
So you're
average like we average like 172 inches a winter. I mean, I can get enough square acres of snow and be real rich.
so Jess, you're in Wisconsin. Chris, where you at?
I'm in upstate New York outside of Syracuse.
Nice, nice, nice.
I love
I've
that you
done
called it Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. I don't know. I don't have the Wisconsin accent down.
It's Wisconsin. No, it's kidding.
Wisconsin. I've got family up there actually.
Oh, what
Yeah.
area?
Uh I don't know. It's my cousin, my aunts, and all of
You
them.
have family up there, but you don't
But I
know
never
where.
visited.
But you should still know where they live.
You know what? I would probably know any other time, but right now I've just got a mental block.
Well, you know what happens to the best of us, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Yep. I was just trying to bring it full circle because that's what we do on podcasts.
You're so fancy. You have like a neon sign for your podcast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my wife got it for me for Christmas a couple of years ago.
Oh,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
that was
yeah,
nice
yeah,
of her. I
yeah.
don't think mine
Absolutely.
mine probably wouldn't show up. My laptop. Probably not.
I was just gonna get one of those really cheap ones from Temu with the record player that they
Mhm.
charge like $18 for. But I'd probably put it back there and it'd probably be, 3 by 3 inches.
Yeah. Well, you wanted
With
to
what
get
they
one of
sent
those
me.
ones that say on air,
I did. I did.
Well, I
even
tell you,
though
the thing that's since I've kind of done this setup, it messes with my lighting really bad. Like I've been
it's
trying to
true.
upgrade video gear and like trying to get a little bit more of a cinematic look, but it messes my lighting up really bad. So I might ditch it at some point in time after I change my configuration again.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Maybe it's the blue.
I think it is. Actually, I think it's the plexiglass. I think too much light reflects off the
That
plexiglass,
could
so it
be.
washes everything out. So,
I've concluded that when I record shows that I go to, that when they have blue lighting, it looks horrible on my phone.
yeah. Huh. Hmm.
Horrible. Doesn't look good. Doesn't look good. That was always a problem too when I used to do concert photography as well.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, yeah.
certain lighting, colors don't work as well, especially when they don't let you use like flash and stuff.
Right. 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 That makes sense. That makes sense. Do you ever run into issues with like uh tour managers and people along those lines whenever you do that type of production at
Oh,
concerts
when
and
I
stuff?
used to do like photography stuff.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we forgot to put that on there. Or it's there, but then the venue said, no, you don't have a pass.
Yep. 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 Yep.
That's a whole big story right there. I have a story with that one, but maybe we'll save that for another time. So yeah, I mean, we can get started if you're ready to get
Yeah,
started.
I'm ready to go whenever you guys are.
We're ready, I think, right, Chris?
Yeah, ready as we'll ever be.
Ready as we're gonna be.
Sounds good.
So, thanks again for coming on. We definitely discussed doing like a collab where you're going to come on our pod and then we're going to go on your pod and all that
Yep.
jazz. But for
Absolutely.
people who don't know you and don't know who Caught on the Mic is, could you just please let listeners know who you are and what you're all about?
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. First of all, thanks for having me, guys. This is awesome. I've been following your content on Instagram for a while now, checking out some podcasts. I'm really impressed with what you guys have done. You haven't been doing it for a very long time, but you're making a big impact. Um, so I was in the music business for like 15 years. I played in various regional, local bands. I got to open up for pretty much every band I've ever wanted to open up for, released 7 albums through several different projects. I quit in 2011. You know, life and age just caught up to me. And my very last show was at a big amphitheater, opening up for Avenged Sevenfold, 3 Days Grace, Hell or High Water, Seven Dust, a lot of great bands on that show. After I got off stage, I kind of realized that that was my Super Bowl moment. You know, I was in my mid 30s, at younger 30s at that point, and I was just like, it's not going to get any bigger than this. I'm not going to be a big rock star, but I've done some amazing things. I've got stories that I'll be able to tell my kids for years. It's time to walk away. Well, the heat of the pandemic happened, and I, like most people, I just found myself socially disconnected from the world. But I had all of these great connections in my back pocket, whether it be from the music industry, from the MMA industry, a little bit from other like entertainment components. So I decided to start a podcast. And the premise of my podcast, it's not really niche down. Like, it's not just about music. It's not just about MMA. It's not just about actors or comedians. It's about telling a person's story and showing that we have more in common in a world that is trying to, as hard as it can, to divide us. So that's kind of the premise of Caught on the Mic. And so I've been doing it since September of 2020, and it keeps growing every couple of months. I will go through, I'm sure you guys can relate to this. I will go through a phase where I'll feel like my show is just growing and growing and growing, and then I'll hit a lull and I'm like, man, I wonder if it's time to pack it in. And then it'll just boom again. But I mean, that's the whole premise of Caught on the Mic. It's just shared human experiences. So
Yeah.
So I actually love that premise as well. A while ago, actually, right around the podcast or pandemic time, um, I met somebody that became a really close friend at the time, and it was one of those moments where you just I have no clue how we became friends on Facebook, but we did. And I was cleaning out my basement when the pandemic hit because what else was I going to do? And I found the album If You Speak Any Faster by June. And on the album, I had the whole band signed it, and I posted it to Facebook. I'm like, I'm going to post this, and this is a really long way of telling you what my idea was for a podcast a few years ago. But so the picture on the album cover is a girl with her hands on doors,
right.
like she's going to open them, and then as you open it, she's got her head in her hands in front of a mirror. Um, this person I randomly added on Facebook goes, "That's my cousin." And I'm like, your cousin was the model for the June album? She's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so we became friends from that. She helped me through a hard time, ironically. We've been close ever since. And I had the idea. We were going to lunch one day, and I had Erica. It'd be a great idea. What we're doing right now, you go to a restaurant or somewhere, you just sit down with somebody random, and you just get to know them. And I
Mhm.
thought that would be an excellent idea for a podcast. Just two strangers talking to each other and getting to know one another. I thought that would have been a great idea for a podcast.
It
Yeah,
could
I
be.
think that's the anchor of every good show is like finding out things that you didn't know. And that's something that I really try and do with every episode that I record is I try and dig the humanity out of my guest. I call what my guests do for a living or did do for a living, I call that the Trojan horse. Like, so I mean, we've got mutual friends like the guys in Letter Kills. It's like it's great. You guys had an amazing album, but what are you into outside of music? And let's talk about that a little bit. And let's dig into that a little bit. And I think that's when podcasting is at its absolute best.
Yeah. We've tried asking guests that before, like, oh, besides music, what are you passionate about? And a lot of them are like, I don't know. It's mostly just music. A lot of
We've
them are very passionate about the music, but we have had some good answers.
we've had quite a few people that were tattoo artists end up
Yeah. We had a
being on that
couple. We had a
that sh
couple.
yeah.
We didn't
It's funny.
know.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the letter kills thing too. I don't know if you saw our episode with Letter Kills. But when they said that, back in the day when they toured, they didn't know anything about each other. They were just a bunch of guys in a van touring, and they never knew where they even grew up. I thought that was
Yeah,
a
because
great piece of information to pull out of that.
just because of how fast that band came together. And you think about that era of music, and I know that's an area that your podcast does really well, and I feel I do really well, is kind of reviving that MySpace era to a certain extent. Everything was moving at such a rampant pace when all of those bands were starting to get big and the advent of social media was happening at the same time. It really was lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. Do
Yeah,
you,
I was going to say there were quite a few bands that definitely used MySpace to their advantage and kind of took off with it.
Yeah.
I know locally here in Syracuse, because they were just outside of here, Gym Class Heroes
Mhm.
really exploded on MySpace. I remember seeing them when they were nothing in a venue that held 100 people, and there was barely 30 people at the venue. So
Well, and unironically, one of their first singles was a song called New Friend Request.
yep.
yeah, not talking about like MySpace days, but like social media nowadays and everything and technology nowadays. Do you think that might have helped you back in the day become a bigger musician?
I don't know. It's kind of a foolhardy thing to stop and think about that because I mean, there's always the what ifs. And I think one of the challenges right now is maybe sometimes newer music is buried because there's so much of it because of social media and because of streaming. Where back when social media was just starting out, you had to kind of dig for the good stuff. Now it's just smacking you in the face. You hear it. 5 minutes later, you've forgotten about it because something else has come along and taken its place. So it's kind of hard to commiserate on that idea or that premise without having actually experienced it.
Right. I could totally see that. I mean, looking for guests for the podcast, it's like, oh, I like this band. I like this band. I like this band. I like this band.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
But
yeah, and
back in the
we
MySpace days, because I used to have an online magazine with some friends, we just, interviewed bands that we knew about from
Hmm.
like MySpace, and it was a lot less of it was a lot smaller of a list,
Hmm.
back then. And that you had to deal with for sure publicists. Everyone had a publicist. Now not everyone has a publicist.
It's funny because I thought we would kind of talk a little bit about the publicist game because I don't know if you guys are working with publicists much for booking your show. But even that kind of has a duality, almost falling in line with your question about social media now versus social media then, is the duality of booking a guest through a publicist versus booking a guest direct to source. You know what I mean? Because there's a difference in the type of interview that you're going to have or the presentation you're going to have. Like, for my personal example is I've had Ryan Key from Yellow Card on my show not quite a year ago, but I've had the Letter Kills guys on a couple times. I just dropped an episode with Eddie Reyes, formerly of Taking Back Sunday, today. And with a Ryan Key episode, I was limited to 25 minutes. There were certain things I could ask, certain things I couldn't ask. Where some of these other guys, we can have an actual organic conversation and like build a rapport. And one of the things that's really important to me as a podcast host is beyond that episode, it's maintaining, developing, and building that relationship, especially if I want to have that guest on again in the future.
Right.
So I don't know. There's a long tirade about publicists there, but it's kind of again, it's kind of a foolhardy measure because without publicists, might not be able to get some of the people for the show that I want to get for the show. But you know,
Right.
I just think as people that are trying to create community and create content around that community, there are barriers and there are challenges that, sometimes bureaucracy is a beautiful thing and sometimes it's not. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I don't think we've been time limited very much on any of our interviews. We've had people say, "Oh, I can only stay for a certain amount of time," but then they'd stay longer because they were having
Right.
a good
I've had
time.
that happen a few times
yeah,
too.
yeah. That
Have
was
you go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say that was one of our first bigger guests that
Yes,
did that.
it
They were like,
was.
"Oh, I'm gonna give you 45 minutes." And we were rounding 45 minutes. I'm like, "Hey, I know you said 45 minutes." And they're like, "No, no, no. I only say that because if I'm not having a good time, I need to get out."
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think that's another one of those beautiful moments of podcasting is when you do build that rapport. Like some of my favorite moments on my podcast are the moments before I pressed record. And like I know the lesson learned is always be recording,
Oh yes,
right?
we always make sure we're recording before
Right.
guests come on.
Right. And so, and sometimes I don't know, like I have this internal monologue that I just don't do it for some reason. But recently had Brian Austin Green from Beverly Hills 90210 on my show. Um, and we had the best conversations about how our dads were both musicians, like for 25 minutes before we even pressed record. And we both kind of looked at each other, and Brian goes, "You should have been recording that." And I go, "I know." So it could have been such a great part of the episode, but
It
it got left
happens.
out.
It
Yeah.
happens.
We've definitely run into that issue a lot. Generally speaking, when we're done, we'll have the guests stay on and we'll chit chat for a little while. And we're like, damn, we should have been recording this because this is better than the actual interview itself was.
Right.
We've had a couple that we're like, dang, we should not have cut recording.
But like in fairness, sometimes some really cool stuff gets said off the cuff once you stop recording and the pressure is gone to where like they can be a little bit more transparent and be a little bit more of their authentic self. And you learn more about your guests that way too,
Yeah.
you know, because everybody has this it's kind of like the id, the ego, and the super ego version of themselves, you know, and performers are going to perform. So every once in a while, you turn the lights off on the stage, and you get to know who the real person is.
Yeah, we had a really great conversation once we cut recording with the grunge band from Russia that we had on, Fetters in Use. So they were very I'd let you know everything that's going on in the world. I actually pre-sent them the questions we were going to ask. I was like, hey, world tensions. I don't want to do anything that's going to set the world alight from a small podcast. And after we cut recording, they were a lot more relaxed and got to know us as people. It was, yeah, just that interaction with them. And they sent a great 1 year anniversary video to us
Oh,
that
that's
I really
amazing.
liked. It was so overly produced, but I loved it.
That's
They went above
amazing.
and beyond more than others.
That's awesome. So who is, you know, not to hijack your own podcast from you, but who's your favorite guest that you guys have had on so far?
Oh,
That's a
I don't
loaded.
know. That's
Can we
a
go?
loaded question. I'd have
Can
to look
we
at my list.
can we go top 20? I could probably do a top five. Um,
I'll tell you, I get asked that question all the time, and it's the reason that I asked it is because it is a loaded question. If you look at your list of guests, any point in time, it's like asking a person to pick their favorite child. I could probably tell you really easily who my least favorite episodes were, but it's really a struggle to say
Yeah, we
who
have a
my most
couple
favorite
that we
are.
would probably put in the least favorite, but I mean,
yeah, yeah.
we're not going to name names though.
Yeah, yeah.
My all-time favorites. I'll do a top five.
Oh,
Soft Spoken was really great. Shane Told of Silverstein. Um, Haunter was a great episode. Senses and man, actually, a fifth one is going to be hard to think of. Um, I'm going to say Mike from All American Rejects. That was a fun
Yeah.
interview.
that's awesome.
He
I,
forced
I'm
us to
not
call him
even
an
I'm not
asshole.
playing this game. I can't do it.
You can't do it.
I couldn't
My
either.
my top so far would have to be Josh from Story of the Year, only because Story of the Year is my favorite band, and he invited himself on.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, I think that's where we're one in the same. Like I absolutely love Story of the Year. When I had Adam on my show, you know, I don't want to say I've had more famous people before him, but for me personally, that was like this is a top five get for me. So
Right?
for that same exact reason.
I know. I talked to Adam and Dan at Not Just a Phase Fest in Milwaukee, and they were both like, "Oh yeah, we'll come on." But I haven't been able to get in touch with Adam. He's like, Message me on Instagram." Not reading my message, Adam.
But he's a busy podcaster himself.
It is. He is busy with his podcast, the Think the
Yeah.
Maker.
Yep. 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 Crazy
Oh,
stuff.
yep, yep, yep. Just like Ducky.
So you're saying you definitely can't hammer out a like top five.
I couldn't. I really couldn't, especially at the precipice of where I am at right now, because I mean, full transparency, like I said kind of in the introduction, I've been on this roller coaster ride where, building the show up, building the show up, building the show up, and I feel like I'm at a point right now where I'm about to peak again. So I say all that because of my own superstition. Like, dropped 150, episode 150 today. And I feel like if I tried to isolate what my favorite episodes were out of 150 episodes, I know that I'd be like, wait a minute, I forgot about this one. Wait a minute, I forgot about that one. And like I said, a lot of the core values of my show are building and maintaining those relationships with guests after they've been on the show.
Yeah.
So I just not going to do the pick my favorite child thing.
Let me let me
There's so many though. Because now you
yeah,
got me thinking more about the interviews we've done, and I do think I enjoyed the Mike Herrera one a lot as
that was a
well.
good one. Dennis from Alisana was great. Alisana, sorry.
Elisana, yes, say it right.
Um, let me flip the question. What would be like your top five dream gets that you have not had on yet? Like, who would you really, really like to have on?
I
Besides
would
someone from Story of the Year.
Yeah, uh, I would say from the music world, and I've got to connect with him. I've got a few connects with him. John Feldman,
Well, yeah,
easily. John Feldman's easily in number one, and it's just because that would be such a layered interview. Because you're not only talking about Goldfinger, but you're talking about his fingerprints, pun intended, on so many other people's music. So, I mean, that could have so many layers to it. Um, and being that I am constantly in guest acquisition mode, that is a harder question too, because I have a lot of feelers out, and there's always I would love to have Bill Lawrence. Do you know who Bill Lawrence is? The creator of Scrubs, Shrinking, Ted Lasso. He's the guy that
I know the shows. I know the
Yeah, he's
shows.
the guy that created all of those shows. Zach Braff would be one that I would just like. I would love to pick his brain. I love Garden State. Like, I made that whole movie my personality for a short period of my life. Um, I don't know. There's so many. But it's also I also try and maintain this mindset of like, okay, let's keep your humility in check. Who's a tangible get versus who's somebody that's such a big star right now that probably highly unlikely. Um, so that's kind of a hard question too.
I bet My Chemical Romance is a highly unlikely right now.
Yeah. It's funny because I was thinking about them the other day, and I was kind of running down the list. I'm like, okay, let's think of the big name bands when I was playing music that I would have killed to get to know. Letter Kills, Story of the Year, Yellow Card, um, Taking Back Sunday, and Berlin, right? I've had members from all of those bands on my show so far. The only bands that I really haven't had representation on yet, I've had somebody from the Used. I haven't had somebody from My Chem or somebody from Fallout Boy. That would kind of complete the package for me.
Yeah. I told Chris once, I'm like, I want to have Joel Madden on. He's got his podcast.
Yes. 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 Brandon from Atreyu. I'd love to have him on.
I want him as well. There's a bunch of ones that we probably both want that we haven't had yet.
Well, I mean, we do have a mutual favorite band, so
It's
it
true.
makes sense.
It's true. Uh-oh, Chris. Another Story of the Year fan.
It's all right.
Another one.
But yeah, I don't know. Johnny from Avenged Sevenfold, because he's a great interviewer himself.
Yeah.
I haven't I
I
haven't ta- I haven't talked about this one. Just I'd love to have Tim from Rancid on.
yeah, that could be a good one. Old school punk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were gonna say Tim from Rise Against. That'd be
I'll
another
I'll
good
take
one.
that Tim too. I'll take Tim McIlrath. I'm good with him too.
That's a
Yeah.
good one too. Let's just
Yeah.
try. Remember, we didn't think we were going to get Mike Herrera on, and then all of a
We didn't think
sudden,
we were gonna get
bam.
Mike Herrera, anyone from All American Rejects. We didn't think we were gonna get Shane.
Yeah,
So how
but
do you
All American Rejects, I had a friend that's a friend.
that always helps. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
It's true. It's true. You gotta go for it. Like I recently messaged Spencer from Ice Nine Kills, but he hasn't gotten back to me. I have no idea
Amazing.
why. I have no idea why.
Amazing.
I think sometimes people do look at how big your following is, unfortunately. They
Yeah.
don't look at your actual podcast and the content you're putting out. They just look, oh, how many of my fans or how many potential fans is it going to reach? You
Yeah.
know? And that's
Yeah.
what kind of sucks about that aspect.
Absolutely, because it's such a competitive space. And if you're not willing to buy followers or buy impressions or buy likes, then you're just kind of leveraged against your own integrity to a certain degree. Because kind of going back to the MySpace days, towards the end of MySpace, bands used to be able to buy plays because the A&R reps were looking at people's MySpace pages and looking at how many plays that artist had had in a 24-hour period. Well, I mean, they could use a play bot and get 5,000 plays in a 24-hour period that would look impressive to an A&R rep. So
Yeah.
social media is kind of hyped up in the same sense because you go on TikTok and you're scrolling TikTok, you can tell who's buying their follows, you can tell who's buying the likes, and unfortunately, publicists and people in professional fields they're not looking at the minutia behind what the likes are and the engagement is. So
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned like MySpace and A&R reps. It makes me think of MC Lars.
yeah,
And he had that one song called Signing Emo.
yep.
It's all about like the industry and all that. That was such a great song.
That was such a great era.
It was.
Yeah,
MySpace in the early 2000s was the best era.
we never knew how good we had it.
That's where me and Chris met.
No kidding.
Supposedly.
Supposedly, I don't know. We don't really confirm. We can't confirm completely, but we've never met in person. So,
That's
yep.
I mean, to maintain a friendship online for this long, that's an impressive feat.
Yeah, it was online mid 2004. It was either MySpace or a different website that I won't mention the name of because it's slightly embarrassing. Um, but it was one of the two websites, and yeah, we've never met in person, but we bonded over music over all those
Yeah,
years. And
Chris always called me Jam Jess.
Jam Jess, you're still on my phone as Jam Jess.
Wow.
That's amazing.
I'm still Jam Jess on this, even though I changed it. It doesn't want to change. I don't know. I guess I'll forever be Jam Jess.
So, just curious, do you have any standout moments from your days in the band, whether they're touring stories or stories from the stage?
I've got so many. So when I started in music, I was a high school kid in the mid 90s, and I lived at the perfect midpoint between Omaha, Nebraska and Des Moines, Iowa. I played one of my first big bands was a 9-piece ska band called 40 Sunday. And it's back when Slipknot was a local band in Des Moines. I was the little punk rock kid that loved Rancid, that loved Green Day. But I loved everything. Realistically, like I loved hip hop, I loved absolutely everything. I loved ska. But I was the punk kid that used to go to the Slipknot shows when they were a local band. One of their last shows before they went and recorded their debut album with Ross Robinson, my little 9-piece ska band got to open up for him. Now that sounds like an odd pairing, but that happened more frequently than not when they were a local band because the Urge would come open for them, Goldfinger, Real Big Fish, they would all play with Slipknot every time they came through the area. But my little ska band got to open up for Slipknot. Now Taylor Morden has this great documentary called "Pick It Up Ska in the '90s." If you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to see it. But the guys from the Mad Caddies, they talk about the 6-month period of time when ska was at the top of the world, and then 6 months later, everybody was into nu metal. Like all the ska kids had kind of completely flipped a switch and gotten into nu metal, and they're like, "Ska sucks." Well, when we started 40 Sunday, we started at that pinnacle of it. When we opened up for Slipknot, we opened up for Slipknot whenever that switch had flipped, and everybody hated ska and all of a sudden was into nu metal. So a couple months before, we played a Valentine's show, and I'd thrown Valentine's candy out to the audience, and upbeat, fun stuff that ska band guys do. Fine. I decided to pull the same trick at a Slipknot show, and it was like, I was on the battlefield in a third world country because I was getting pelted with candy and everything while we were opening up for Slipknot. But that was kind of my entry into like playing on some of the big stages and such. And so that's a great memory. Played, oh man, there's just so many. But yeah, that one was a fun one.
I love ska music. I still love ska music.
I do too.
It's so fun, and you can skank all night if you want. Skank all night.
So I asked this question to one other person since I know you like ska now. KSB Nights, Catch 22, or Streetlight Manifesto?
Mm.
Just having a hard time deciding this one.
Streetlight.
I can get down with that. I'm right in the middle. I like both of them pretty much equally. Um, but yeah, I know when that album was re done, well, when it was done with Streetlight, it was to make it sound like how it was supposed to sound
Hmm.
before it was changed with the arrangements with Catch 22. But I like finding out from other ska fans which version
Ska
they like.
fans.
For
See, I
sure,
don't
for
think
sure.
I listened to a lot of Catch 22. I was more of a like I said, I was like a Suburban Legends kind of girl.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
What about like Planet Smashers?
There was also
Big
this
D.
ska band back in my high school days called I Voted for Kodos. Remember I mentioned them once?
Yep.
My high school days. We used to go to their shows. Those were fun.
Ska shows are always fun.
I know there's so much good ska out there. We actually, because we had Stacked Like Pancakes on, and they were fun, and they're really good, a really good
Yeah.
ska band from Minnesota. But technically, they're not really from Minnesota anymore.
It's like a lot of music right now. Ska music feels like it's in the ska scene is kind of evolved in a sense where it's blending and I would call it kind of the sublime effect where they're blending elements of like hip hop and traditional reggae and ska music now. So it's really hard. I feel it's a lot harder to classify things as ska now than what it was at the peak of third wave, like in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah. Would you
So
still classify like Less Than Jake and Real Big Fish as
oh,
ska?
absolutely, because that's
Yeah.
because they came out in the peak of it. So, but I mean, you think about there's so many. Oh gosh, who was I just listening to? I don't
I hate
know.
when that happens. You're like, crap, I can't remember who I was just thinking of.
Yeah, but I don't
Those,
know.
that's
It's
our
kind of this.
brains.
It's kind of the Sublime 311 effect, I think. So,
Yeah, definitely. So, talking a little bit back in the day again,
mhm.
did you ever attend Warp Tour? You had to have
Yes,
attended Warp Tour.
yeah, yeah.
Did you, how many years did you go to?
Oh my gosh, this is going to be embarrassing, and
Uh-oh.
I will have an explanation for it. I've only gone to one Warped event, and it's when it came to Council Bluffs, Iowa. And the reason being was I went through a period of my life where I was so focused on making my own music and doing my own shows that I barely went to anybody else's concerts, which is sounds absolutely insane for a musician. I know Bad Religion played the year I went because that's who I went to see.
What year
But
was it? Do you not
I think
remember?
I think it was '03 or '04. No, it was earlier than that.
I
Might
was
have
gonna
been
say if it
'02.
was '03, that was the first year I went.
It might have been '02. I don't remember. I
I
can't.
don't know.
I.
I'd have to look it up.
Yeah.
Maybe Chris is
Yeah.
Googling it already.
No. No, my new setup doesn't allow me to be quick
What?
searching anymore.
Chris.
Sorry.
I don't know if I like this new setup. You can't Google while we're talking
I don't know.
to find answers. Yeah, O2 Warped Tour I was supposed to go to, but the friends I was friends with in high school said they weren't going, but then they went and pretty much ditched me.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was '02. Now that I think about it, it was '02 that I went because I was I I can correlate it because the job I was working at that summer, I was teaching kids how to ride horses at a horse camp. That was
Oh,
my day job that summer. And I remember going missing a day to go to the Warp Tour.
that sounds like a fun job. Was it fun or was it just like fun, but then it wasn't fun?
Oh, it was a blast. It was a blast. Wasn't a lot of money, but it was fun.
I mean, you got to be around horses.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love
Absolutely.
horses.
It's that I think that's a weird part of my trajectory was like my employment history while I was trying to do the band thing. I had a lot of really good bosses and good jobs where I took care of them, so they always took care of me. So I'm like, hey, I got to go out of town from Thursday to Sunday because I'm playing shows across 5 different cities. You good with that? And, I'd give them advance notice and, I'd get those opportunities. So I
Yeah.
don't know. Work smart, not hard kind of situation.
Smarter, not harder. Yep.
Yeah.
I know we've had some bands on the podcast where they had to quit their jobs to go on tour.
Hmm.
Yeah, I actually for a short time worked for Alltel down in Tampa, and my supervisor told me a story one day that some guy used to work here in a band. I think it's Maylene and something something. And I'm like, and he's like, he tried to get like a short-term disability or some kind of claim to go on tour,
Right.
and they denied it, and he quit. I thought that was great.
So did you get to like, well, as a
Yeah,
matter of fact,
yeah, yeah. I got to have that
right.
conversation. He was. This manager was big into like ska and punk music, but he didn't know Maylene and the Sons of Disaster.
That's crazy. That's crazy. But no, I think that's another element in which the music industry has changed dramatically. Like you used to have to sell your life away and be ready to be on the road for 6 months straight. And now even bands that we're all fans of that kind of were popular back in the day have figured out this formula to where they can turn it into kind of a satellite thing. And ironically, that was one of the things that Adam and I went into the weeds on the Adam from Story of the Year and I went into the weeds on our episode where we were talking about that new way the music industry has changed. So, band people can have families and then they can have day jobs and not sign their entire life away like they used to.
Hmm.
So,
Unless they want to.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Unless that is
Absolutely.
their job. The
Right,
band is their job. I mean,
right,
some people are still like that, but then we know a lot of people that aren't. They have
right.
other jobs.
And it's funny you mentioned that, and this is going to be a really obscure reference, but I remember being on Rise Against's website back in the day, and under their FAQ, one of the questions was, um, do the members of Rise Against have a job when they're not touring? And the answer was they're doing well enough as to where music is their full-time job. I don't know why that stuck with me and why I remember it to this day, but I remember seeing that on their FAQ. I just,
You know what's funny though? You guys have talked to enough musicians now to where that's not the entire truth.
Right.
Most guys and gals that even did really well um back in the day had to go back to regular jobs because, there was so much overhead involved in that era of music that these guys were hardly taking anything home after it's all said and done. A lot of the times they'd finish tours or finish album cycles and be left with a bill as opposed to a paycheck.
Yeah.
So I
how
don't know.
much how much better do you think that is now compared to then? Because I know like merch cuts are out of this world now. Um,
Merch merch cuts are, and people like to toot the horn of how little streaming pays, but you know, I think I don't know. It would involve a lot of accounting and a deep dive into the accounting of the music industry, but I think bands, again, to sound repetitious, I think bands do work a lot smarter than harder. I think of, totally outside of the genre of our current conversation, but one of the most ingenious moves in the music industry was what Dave Matthews did when he signed his deal in the 90s. He didn't want profits from his recordings, he wanted profits from the touring. And, you know, Dave Matthews essentially became the modern day Grateful Dead of that
Hmm.
time, to where no matter what city he was playing in, he was selling it out and overselling it to a certain extent. So to have his back end tied to tour dollars and less about the music itself, that was way ahead of its time. Now, you do hear stories about how like venues are now taking merch cuts and such along those lines. It makes you wonder if that's because a lot less people are drinking. So venues are not getting alcohol sales like they used to. Ticket sales are ticket costs are so much higher than they used to be. Shows aren't selling out quite as well. One of my side gigs is I do personal and event security. And there was a major major label artist in town a month ago in my city that would have sold out an arena 10 years ago, but even up to the week of show had only sold 5,000 tickets. And the arena's capacity was 14,000. You know, it's
Yeah.
just different times. The economics are really weird now. So it's hard to pinpoint whether it's or not it's more successful these days. Sorry, long tirade there.
Oh, don't worry about it. We go on tirades all the time, right, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about ticket prices and everything, and they just announced, a little while ago, Warped Tour was coming back. But really, is it Warped Tour? It's more
Right,
like Warped Festival.
right,
Yeah. I was just
right.
curious what your thoughts on that were.
Um, I love to see it. Um, I love to see it, but and not to sound pessimistic, but I've grown incredibly cynical post pandemic because I thought the pandemic was really going to kill the music industry. And it seems like once everything opened back up, it had the reverse effect. And now everything feels almost a tinge oversaturated. Like, even in my market, three brand new pristine venues opened up in my market. And I'm talking like 1,000+ type venues, 1,000+ capacity type venues. And I was thinking at the time, okay, this is post pandemic. How the hell are, these venues going to be able to survive? And then the tours started rolling through, and there's so much entertainment coming through anymore that they're basically stabbing each other in the back for market share. So I don't know. Like, so to answer your question, how I feel about the Warp Tour, I don't feel like it's much different than, say, a When We Were Young festival
Right.
or something along those lines, where it's probably going to be an awesome lineup. It's probably going to be way overpriced, but if you can afford it and you can swing it, like, you're probably going to make some amazing memories when you go. So, and relive some nostalgia. So I don't know. I'm not for it. I'm not against it. I wish I was more optimistic about it, but I don't know.
I'm still holding out hope there's a Midwest date that gets added.
Right. Yes. Yes. Have they actually announced dates yet?
Yeah, there was Long Beach, 2 dates in Long Beach, and then DC, and then
Right.
Florida. But
Right.
Florida hasn't sold out yet. The other two
Yeah, it
have.
did. It sold out.
Oh, finally sold out.
Yep.
Well, I'm not going to Florida.
No, and the cheapest tickets were 150. And then like there was a bunch that were tiered higher.
Yeah, they did tiers. So once the 150 tickets were done, then you had to go up a tier
Yep.
and up a tier and up
Hmm.
a tier. And I'm like, this is not how Warped Tour used to be. It used to be one set ticket. It was like not even over $40.
Right.
But what really stunk, because when the tickets went live, I went in the waiting room. It was a lottery waiting room. It wasn't a line. It was a lottery.
Right.
So like you have everyone in the room and they just pick somebody at random.
Ugh.
Um, and I
Yeah.
I I got in, but I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna let this memory be.
Yeah, Chris got in, and me and a friend of mine were both in the queue and never got in for like ever.
I should have bought the tickets for you.
You should have bought them for
Gosh.
me. And then I could go to Florida and meet my Australian friend. Yeah. Oh, it's not the same as old school Warped Tour, that's for sure.
I think it's just can be quantified across like a lot of these package tours. I think festivals really are the way of the future, though. Uh,
Sadly.
yeah, yeah,
I want to
and
go to
that's
Welcome to Rockville.
they just announced Coachella today too. The
Yeah, I
the
don't care about
Coachella.
Coachella.
Oh, there's the Misfits are playing on day two. I would. I want to see the OG Misfits really bad.
I see. I see. Yes.
So yeah, for sure.
Off topic of music. I heard you are really into pro wrestling.
I'm into well, okay. So I've been in and out of pro wrestling my whole life. Okay. Um my I worked for a little while with an independent promotion doing some graphic design, and which allowed me the opportunity to do some graphic design work for AJ Styles right before he went to WWE. But I came back into pro wrestling when my kids got into it. When my kids were younger, they got into it. So that was kind of my entry level into podcasting was through pro wrestling. It was like I'd listen to Chris Jericho's podcast, then I'd listen to Wade Keller's podcast, and then the next thing I know, I'm listening to all podcasts from all other interest facets all over the world. But I'm more so I'm into MMA,
Yeah.
mixed martial arts. I've done some form of martial art my entire life. So it's just, and I've got a connection to a lot of fighters. As a matter of fact, I am doing cage side commentary for a pay-per-view that's going to be on the Triller app this Friday. So yeah, it's another
Nice.
interest set. Yeah, which again, other long tangent aside, it's just wrestlers and MMA fighters and musicians have very similar stories, life stories, and that's something that kind of piques my interest and why I have a lot of those types of people on my show.
Yeah. Favorite pro wrestlers though?
Favorite pro wrestler of all time is the Macho Man Randy Savage.
Wow. It's true. It's true.
He's the best. He's the best. Uh, you know, but yeah,
Yeah, I was into wrestling back in like my middle school days because my brother was into wrestling.
right. Yeah,
And so I went to a couple of like WWF at the time,
right.
Raw,
Yeah.
like recordings in like Milwaukee and everything. And I'm like, oh, I was in love with the Hardy Boys. I
That's
still have their
amazing.
VHS tape, the Hardy Boys, Leap of Faith.
That's amazing.
I was in love with them. Not anymore. Mm-mm.
Right. Right. It's funny because it's just it's fun to take a little cursory pass of it from time to time and just like it's just entertainment, you know?
Yeah. My husband and I will be sitting on the couch on a Friday night and we'll be watching the news and then the WWE will come on afterwards. And then he's like, they should find something else to watch. And then we just are sitting here still just watching it randomly. Why is this still on? I thought you wanted to watch something else.
Just get sucked into it
Sometimes
for sure.
it's a giant soap opera in all
Yeah.
actuality.
Yep.
Yeah, it's you want to learn about American politics, watch pro wrestling. Society and politics is pro wrestling.
It's true. It's true.
I was a big Mick Foley fan, so like Mankind and
Oh
everything.
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
And I
Him and
still
his
remember,
sock.
yeah, I remember convincing my mom to get his autobiography, and she went to the store and like opened the book, and the first word in the book is fuck, and she was like, nope.
Your mom was like, "Why did I buy you this?"
No, she didn't get it for me.
Oh, she didn't get it for you.
She was like, you can't. I got it for myself later on, but she was like, no, nope. I was like,
Yeah.
because he starts off the book by the story where his ears ripped off.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
yep.
So,
Oof.
yep, that's how he starts the whole book.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
I just
Yeah.
remember all the old school ones, like Stone Cold Steve Austin,
Hmm.
good old Stone Cold,
I
and The
love that
Rock, of
guy.
course, who, is The Rock, Dwayne
So
Johnson.
let me ask about The Rock. Do you feel that his social stock has dropped in recent years? Like, do you feel like there's society has kind of turned their back on The Rock a little bit?
I don't think he's in as much as he used to be. Like he was hot for a big minute. Like he was
And
in everything.
I'm not talking about wrestling. I'm just talking about entertainment in general. Like
No, I
he
mean like
almost
in movies and
yeah,
everything and all
yeah, it's
that.
like he
Oh
wore
yeah,
out his welcome to a certain
Yeah,
extent,
a
you
little
know?
bit, a little bit. He
Yeah.
was like in so much and all of a sudden now he's just not in anything.
I
Yeah.
think I think he pushed it once he got into the Fast and Furious
Hmm.
series. I
Yeah.
think I think that was really the okay. We've got too much Dwayne Johnson going on.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it was kind of I think there was a domino effect that happened with him doing the Fast and the Furious movies and then kind of pushing his way into the DC Comics universe movies and to where like enough I want to say backstage, but enough behind the scenes stories leaked out that were just negative enough to where, people were like, maybe we need to cool down on this guy a little bit.
Maybe a little
So,
bit.
yeah,
They'll just hype up Jason Momoa instead.
right.
See, but I think the same thing, well, it's a little bit of a different story, but the same thing kind of happened with Jack Black, it seems.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's anybody that
Hmm.
becomes famous. Because if you really think about it, you could say the same thing about Will Ferrell. Like, shoot, here's one that we just made a joke about. My group of friends and I were texting each other about was a year ago. Matt Rife came to our market, sold out like 4 shows across 4 nights, and you had to like people. There were thousands and thousands in queue for a show in just a small market like Omaha, Nebraska. Just announced a show today coming back, and I asked my buddies, I'm like, do you think there's even gonna be half the hype that there was a year ago for this? You know?
Be curious to see the outcome.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Now we're talking about comedians. That's one aspect we've tried to do with the podcast. We've tried to have a couple comedians on. I think we've only gotten one. I think
Hmm.
Marcus was the only one.
Yeah.
But I would love to get more comedians on.
Yeah.
Before she ended up, getting the TV show, I would have loved to have had Taylor on, Taylor Tomlinson. That would have been a great one. I'd still love to have Jeff R. Curry on. But
It's hard, I will say, as I've had a few on. Sometimes it's really hard to translate their art form through the podcast, through the format like this that's remote. Um, I almost wonder, and it's something I'm going to try and experiment with later on down the line, but sometimes it makes you wonder if having them on in person it just doesn't have a better effect, you know? I mean, and
Yeah.
that's just something that I've experimented with trial and error so far.
Yeah, we had Marcus on, but we talked about music as well with Marcus because he's a big, you know, music guy as well. But I don't think that interview went that great, like with people listening and
with
viewing
people
it.
listening, but the
Yeah.
actual interview was
The
great.
interview was
But
great.
the
People are missing
reception
out.
was awful. People
Right.
just didn't watch. Um, but that was a good interview. And of
It was
course,
a good one.
we talked about his way back in the day. Him and a friend did a video called the Cinnamon Toast Crunch Wrap. You can still find it on YouTube. It was great.
Yeah, I think it was 17 years ago.
Oh wow.
But
It was
yeah,
a great, and we talked all about that, and it was fun. I didn't realize that General Mills sent him a whole pallet of Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Crazy.
and someone tried to buy the rights to the song, and he said no.
And now he's like, I should have sold it.
Jeez. Jeez. Do you guys find that that's a really a good question, kind of throwback at you guys. Do you guys find yourself turning down guests as much as you are trying to recruit them for the show?
No.
No, we have. Well,
We've turned down some guests, but that's
we
because it's like they have like one song out.
we've done a couple soft declines where we'll say, we'll talk about, if we want to have somebody on and we'll get back to you kind of thing, but we're thinking about you kind of thing. But there's been a couple, that have reached out and we've known immediately. But letting somebody down who's reaching out to you, it's a really hard thing to do.
Yes. Yeah, it is.
Um,
It is.
but there's been a couple where we're like, no way. No
Right.
way, like neither of us either vibed with it or just the way that they've presented themselves or they've only had one song. I'm pretty sure we had someone reach out who had no songs released, but they had like a little snippet and that was it. Um, so yeah,
It's not that I don't appreciate them trying because we're trying to like do stuff, but we also want to make it worth our time
Yeah.
just as much as they want to make it worth their time when it comes to like getting their music out there and stuff.
Right. Right.
yeah,
It's a self-appraisal thing. And that's one thing that I've kind of it's a phase that I've been in the past couple of months is like taking a step back and looking at my guest acquisition process and trying to reevaluate it so I get the most for the time that I spend on it. You know what I
Right.
mean? If that makes sense. So like I spend a lot more time looking at somebody's the same exact thing that we hate people doing to us. I look at other people's social media, but I look at what they share, how they promote. Like there are some people that just throw up a post or like record a song and they don't put any momentum behind it to expose it to many people. So if they're doing that with their own artwork, what are they going to do with it as a guest on your show? They're going to be
Right.
the same people that don't share your episodes, that
Yeah.
yeah.
you
We've had
know
a
that
few of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where you're like, okay, this is a communal relationship here. Like, so I've had to get a little bit more picky to the point where, yeah, I've probably turned a few away recently. And my response typically is not at this time, but check back with me later down the line.
Yeah,
You know,
we've
I'm
done
I'm
that.
kind about it, but
Yeah.
I just wondered if there was some commonality between us in regards to that.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And I would say the biggest thing when looking, because I would say we primarily don't rely on like promoted or sponsored ads coming across our social media to find
Right.
people. We have a couple times. Um, but really getting a feel for the people as we communicate with them, as you're talking about, some of them won't share or anything like that. Getting someone to understand like, hey, this is a symbiotic relationship here.
Yes.
Like we are going to promote you, but at the same time, you got to be promoting us.
Right.
And
And
it's
not everyone does that, which
Yeah.
sucks because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm promoting this daily, but you can't even like, I tagged you in this story, but you can't just hit that add to my story button.
Right. Well, I see that you've seen it because I look at who's all viewed my stories today, but you didn't share it?
It's not a hard concept either. It's really
No.
easy. You don't even have to say anything about it. Just share what I shared.
Right.
You
Right.
don't have to add your own little words on there. It's just a quick click and a click, probably, I think. I think it's like 2 clicks.
Yeah.
But
So what social media format have you guys found has been the most successful for you guys?
Instagram.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah. And then when it comes to our actual episodes, I think YouTube
YouTube is our best
is
now.
our best performer.
Now that we have the YouTube, more people want to watch, or they're listening on YouTube more than Spotify, because Spotify doesn't get as many listens as YouTube gets views anymore. So,
See, so that's a real good segue because that is something a trend that I noticed as well. So mine's been going on for 4 years now. I just went to YouTube in April. Like
yeah.
I've been audio only until April of this year. And it is weird the shift in momentum that has occurred by going to video and having a video format. I think that's kind of something that's trickling down across the entire podcast industry as a whole. And I think that's why Spotify is getting really desperate for getting video podcasts on their new platform
Yeah.
as soon as they can, because I think they see that as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, people like to scroll on their phones through like Instagram Reels and TikTok, and all that.
Mhm.
So people are watching video.
Right.
They want to watch video. So YouTube is the bigger platform now for us, for sure.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of YouTubers that I watch that don't have podcasts that have mentioned in their videos. The YouTube algorithm right now is really pushing podcasts, whether it's the shorts or the regular feed, or channels, if you will. That YouTube's algorithm is really pumping them. And a couple people that I've watched that have been like daily vloggers or like lifestyle channels, have mentioned, hey, YouTube is really pushing this. I'm going to start a podcast, just to keep up that interaction because YouTube isn't pushing those lifestyle and daily vlog channels anymore.
Right.
Um,
Right. Do you guys do TikTok at all?
If you want to call it doing TikTok. I think we have 96 followers and
Yeah.
we've had our TikTok for, a year and a half, pretty much.
TikTok, when I first started my podcast, was really helpful. But I also started it in the heat of the pandemic when
Right.
TikTok was really fresh and the algorithm was the Wild West. Um, and that was a great time to start a podcast. I wish I was creating the level of content I create now back then, because this
Right.
could be a totally different conversation. I think the engagement piece on TikTok has changed since they've gone to more promoting sponsored TikTok shop stuff. Everybody that you follow on TikTok is selling something now. And at
Hmm.
least one of their videos, find one of your favorite follows, and at least one of their videos has them selling stuff on it. So that's a little disheartening, because the algorithm was so good when, Chris was just mentioning the algorithm. But I'll be really curious to see what happens with TikTok in January, because I think January 25th is whenever the ban is supposed to go into play.
Supposedly.
Supposedly. Supposedly. But exciting news for us as podcasters that love using Instagram. Instagram announced this week that they users can now reset their algorithm. I don't know if you guys caught on to that.
Mm-mm.
Yep. You can go to settings now, and I think it's like reset viewing history. So it's almost like you get a clean slate on TikTok or on Instagram.
Hmm.
Hmm.
I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonder if it would help.
See, I do too. I do
You haven't
too.
done it yet?
I haven't done it yet. I'm scared.
You're afraid
If
to
if
hit
you
that
want to if
button,
you want to know the truth, I'm scared. I'm
right? What
scared.
if it really messes it up and makes it worse?
Right, exactly.
I'll wait until someone else does it and let me know.
Yeah, for
Got
sure.
that? Listeners, viewers, if you reset your algorithm on your Instagram, message us. Let us know how it's going.
You mentioned like how everybody is selling something. I also find it wild, some of the sponsors that are out there that people are getting.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know if you have watched or listened to Hawk versus Wolf, which is Tony Hawk's podcast.
Yeah.
Um, the sponsors they get just seem so out of left field. Like I can't explain. They had some health product. I can't remember what it was. Um, and it's just you can tell when they're doing it for just for the sponsorship and they're not in it because they believe in the product. And their sponsorship just felt so forced
Right.
when they're reading their little script or whatever they got in front of them. Um, but I've made jokes about like sponsorship. We've made a couple of jokes about like sponsor us during the podcast. And actually, while we were talking about this, I looked up like easy to get podcast sponsors just to see what comes up. And people say Red Bull and Monster are easy. Um, but yeah, like I it, I'm really wondering about we talked about the integrity. That's one of the things like as people look through your social media, you're looking for the integrity. How do you feel about people just pulling in whatever random sponsor they can just to
So I think you almost have to take yourself to an out of body experience and not be attached. Don't be married to your podcast and don't be married to the sponsor and be married to the idea what's going to make the most money in the shortest amount of time. You think about who the biggest consumer of podcasts are. And sorry, this just it's the statistics don't lie. It's males from the age of 22 to 36 like are consuming podcasts more than anybody. Okay? So all the ads are going to be designed to target those guys. It's going to be gym bros and people along those lines, and that's where you're going to see a lot of the advertising geared towards. Now, there's random one-offs like, a BFFs or uh some of these other shows, but I don't know, like I have this weird dichotomy with the idea of pursuing a sponsorship for the exact things that you talk about. It's like I would want it to be brands that I use, brands that I could stand behind, things that I actually support. And I've thought about that a couple of times because how much of a time investment is this endeavor that we do? How much does that take up? Wouldn't it be nice to monetize it a little bit and be able to take some money home from it? But again, it has that duality of like, yeah, but I don't want to be a shill for something I don't believe in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I I don't know if I made a bunch of sense or if that was just word salad there, but
Yeah, so essentially you're saying you don't want to push a caffeinated muscle protein powder
right.
just just for
Unless
the
I'm
sake of
using it. Yeah,
right,
unless it's
right.
something I use or believe in. For
It's
sure.
funny. It's funny that you talk about a protein powder though, Chris. Did we just have Done For, the band Done For on the podcast, and they actually came out with some workout powders that they're
That's awesome.
advertising
Good for them.
for them. And I was like, and his one band guy was like, "Really?" He's like, "Yeah, we just dropped it today."
Jeez.
It sounds like it must have started off as like an inside joke and then they just made it happen somehow.
I think
Yeah.
so.
There's a nootropic product called Magic Mind that is notorious for reaching out to podcasts to be a sponsor. And they've reached out to me about 4 times. And like I look at it and I'm like, okay, this actually sounds kind of cool, but then you read the fine print and they want you to buy their product at a discount on Amazon to try it, and then they'll send you uh, a repayment for the money you spent on it. So it sounds like a pyramid scheme or a multi-level marketing scheme. It's like, I want nothing to do with this.
Well,
Um,
yeah. We've had people reach out. Oh, we can, share your podcast. I was like, how much?
right.
Is it free? Because if it's free, I'll let you do that. But it's
Right.
never free.
Nothing
I
ever
do
Never
is.
free.
I do have a really quick random question. Have you played with promoting your reels or whatever the case may be? And if you have done the pay to promote
Like boosting.
boosting, have you actually seen a direct impact, not in views, but in subscriptions?
That's a really good question. I did play with it in the early days. I haven't done it in a long time, but I'll tell you, I've played with paying to promote on Facebook and paying to promote on Instagram. Um, and maybe a little bit of return on investment on it, not much. Where I noticed the biggest upswing, and this kind of goes back to my whole story about TikTok, was when I was consistently making content on TikTok. I've noticed a consistent, it might be small, but it's consistent upswing in downloads on the podcast. So maybe I'm not getting a ton of engagement on that platform, but people are seeing just enough that they're searching it out and maybe checking out an episode.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's why I still use our TikTok and I still post stuff to it, but I just don't care as much about it.
right, right. Oh, and I'm kind of the same way. I go through this thing where I try and do, and I limit myself to Monday through Friday. I try and do 1 minute video every single day. It could be just the most random thing, but mostly the message is what my website is, where people can find the podcast. Move on. But it's one of those things where I'm a big believer in the Gary V theory. Like if you're not doing it, you have no reason to bitch if you're not getting the results, right?
Right.
So I don't know.
It's
So
true. All right, off topic of TikTok. Since we're not doing great on TikTok, uh, I read or I heard that you collected vinyl when you were a kid, but you lost your collection.
Mhm.
Now I'm curious, you restarted making that collection. Do you know how many vinyl records you actually have? Have you counted them?
currently currently when I had him as a kid, my dad and I used to go to estate sales, and we'd go to estate auctions, and we would buy whole cardboard boxes full of vinyl at a time. We probably had 3 to 4 thousand records. My dad had a consignment shop in this town that we lived in, and I had a whole room that was nothing but vinyl. I had Beatles, Rolling Stones, Kiss, like tons of classic rock. I had blues, I had jazz. I've been living on my own since I was 16 years old. After I moved out of the house, dad sold the vinyl. Um, just the past couple of years, I just pick up records, and I have a criteria. I have to absolutely love the record or absolutely love the band if I'm going to buy it on vinyl. So right now, I'm probably sitting only at about like 200,
Oh,
but not
only
much.
200.
Only 200.
I wonder how many I have right now.
But
You don't keep a
Maybe
list?
I have them sitting somewhere. I probably have like 25.
God, I've been buying up anytime I see anything from Jimmy Eat World on vinyl, I buy it.
Yeah.
I
I
was
don't
I
I
was
don't know if you
oh,
listened to our All American Rejects with Mike from All American Rejects episode, but he said he's got like 4,000 records. Yeah.
I have a cousin in Australia that's what he does for a living now is he's a distributor. And so he just to taunt me, he sends me pictures of his vinyl room, and it is insane. It's like a library of
Damn.
records. I'm like, dude, envious. But
What were you gonna say, Chris?
I wasn't going to say anything,
Oh, I
but
thought you were gonna say
since you
something.
gave me a segue, no, like I've been keeping a list. I've been collecting for a little while. My biggest all at once was my I don't know, a friend's grandmother was getting rid of her vinyls. And my friend texted me, was like, "Hey, you collect these, right?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You want to come over and just thumb through her stuff?" And I got so many classic rock albums out of that. I don't think he knew what he was sitting on. I didn't take everything, but I left and I'm like, just so you know, a lot of these albums you have are worth a lot of money. I said, I'm not going to sit here and like tell you to go through them and like sell them and everything. I said, but I'm not going to do you dirty. I was like, I'm gonna give you some money for what I took, but the rest of what you have, you've got thousands of dollars worth of vinyls here. He's like,
Yeah.
really? Yeah. Like he
It's
had,
crazy.
there was a Zeppelin 4. It was one of the Zeppelins I already had, so it was either 2 or 4 that was still wrapped.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh,
that's the sweet stuff.
The stuff
There's
that's
a
not unwrapped.
there's a Beatles album that is the holy grail of record collecting. It was an album that came out in 1964. It was called Yesterday and Today. And the very first cover that they released of it, it had the Beatles on the cover. They were all wearing butcher coats like they worked in a meat market, and they had slabs of steak just sitting on their bodies in different spots and little baby doll heads all over the place.
Hmm.
It got recalled. There was 100,000 copies that got recalled and left out in the wild. Everything else got taken back to the manufacturer, and they just slapped a different album cover over those covers. Well, when people would get the taped over cover, they would take hair dryers and stuff and try and peel them back to reveal the original cover. So an original cover version, I think, has a market value of like 5 grand, to where like a stick-on version I think is about 2 grand, and then they had everything pressing after that had the new cover to it.
Dang.
Yeah.
have you ever looked for or sought out some of the original like hardcore punk DIY albums like Black Flag or anything like that?
I've okay. So one of my Holy Grail albums, I had a 45 of Black Flag's version of Louie Louie, and I don't think he was the one singing on it. I could be wrong. I'd have to look it up, but it had Rollins' signature on it.
Dang.
Yeah. But there was a Goodwill store that was right next to a place that I worked, and my wife's cousin just went in there on a whim, and this is like 2 years ago, and he pulled out a fat stack that had like Misfits and Black Flag and Sex Pistols, and they were original pressings, Bad Brains. I was like, dude, how did you luck upon that? He goes, I have no idea. Somebody's parents or grandparents got pissed off and donated these.
Man, I wish that would happen at my work. I work at a thrift store, and when we get records in, it's all just garbage. It's all just like, oh, here's this Christmas holiday record that nobody
Right,
wants.
Yeah.
And
right.
I never we came across some pretty decent ones that I did snag up. But after that, it's like I haven't seen any really good ones. Like nothing from like the 2000s era ever shows up or anything, you know.
Right,
People
right.
are
And
holding
that's
on to those.
well, and I think that's also because vinyl was so obsolete for a while. Like
Right,
it went completely off the market in the United States from like 92 until like the mid aughts. Like
right.
vinyl really has just made a comeback. It's almost like it's new again. Taking back Sunday pun.
It's funny you mentioned Bad Brains. I was at, of all places, Barnes and Noble with a friend, and we were thumbing through the records they have there. And of course, in the reggae section, they had Bad Brains because they changed their sound. And
Yeah,
she's like, "Oh, I really like," and she mentioned one of the newer albums. And I laughed. I'm like, she goes, "Why?" I'm like, "Have you listened to their original stuff?"
yeah. I think there was an album that came out in 94 called Rise, and they were really kind of starting to play around with reggae a little bit. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reggae rock's coming back.
yeah, yeah. Brings the ska talk full circle.
Yep, for sure.
And actually, with coming full circle, back with full circle, it brings us to our last question for you.
Yeah.
And if you've listened to any of our recent episodes, you're going to know what question this is. What's your favorite dinosaur?
Favorite dinosaur?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Man. You know, I think the Triceratops is just kind of a badass. Like, it's really easy to say, a Velociraptor or, a Tyrannosaurus Rex or a Brontosaurus or Supersaurus, but the Triceratops just looks tough. And, but I bet he's a big softy on the inside. And I think that's a good way to describe myself and the type of people I like running with.
Yeah. You look like a tough dude, but you're really a softie on the inside.
I am. I'm really soft. For God's sakes, I said I want to interview Zach Braff, and that Garden State was my personality for a while.
It's true. You did say that. But I mean, it would be a great interview, I bet.
Oh, it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, people have a tough time answering the dinosaur question sometimes.
I don't know why. What's so hard about it?
I don't
Unless they
know.
just don't know the names of the
They just don't know
dinosaurs.
dinosaurs, I
Right.
think.
Yep.
Yeah, we tend to get like both ends of the spectrum. Someone's either really excited we just asked them, or they're completely dumbfounded. And
I think Chris from Third Eye Blind, he was like, "Why do you ask people that question?"
Yeah, every good podcast has to have that wrap up question. But I know a little bit of paleontology. I've moved around my entire life. I spent some time in my childhood living in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Rio Rancho, New Mexico, where archaeological digs and that type of stuff was commonplace. Like when I was a kid and I lived in Rio Rancho, Coronado, the explorer, they found his first campsite less than a mile away from my house on an archaeological dig. So stuff's always kind of interested me.
I wish I could go to see some archaeological digs. That'd be my
Oh,
whole family. We're huge into dinosaurs and everything. That'd just be
You're not as crazy into dinosaurs as my friend Heather, though.
no. I've heard the stories. I'm not.
Well, that was our last question.
well, thanks for having me. This is
Yeah, it was
fun.
fun. It was
This is a
fun just
fun
chatting.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We like to just chat about random things. That's what makes things fun. I like learning things about people. I like learning what they were into. And then you find out you have mutual interests with people, which is crazy all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the joy of this whole format is um it's something we kind of forget about when we're kids. We forget how to be curious as we become cynical teenagers, becoming even more cynical adults as we forget the power of curiosity. And I think that's what makes podcasting great.
Yep, definitely.
We get to stay curious.
Yes.
Stay curious.
Walt Whitman quote to quote one of my favorite shows, Ted Lasso. Don't be judgmental, be curious.
Don't be judgmental. Be curious.